What is the most disturbing true crime story you know?
Mary Vincent. Total badass but horrifying survival story. Mary was 15 years old, I think, hitchhiking in California hoping to get back home. Picked up by a posse who then raped her and cut off both of her arms and shoved her down a cliff. Mary Beep shoved her cut off arms into the mud to stop them from bleeding and hiked for hours and miles to the freeway. Way more to the story, but that is the basics. Mary is a warrior.
I don't remember the name, but I listened to a podcast about a hitchhiker getting kidnapped, but she managed to escape and the police would not believe she got kidnapped. Finally, they pick up the guy on an unrelated charge and he just starts confessing. Turns out not only did he kidnap her, he had murdered a number of people but with no consistent style, so no one had even linked the murders. It really makes you wonder if there's prolific serial killers out there that just don't follow any patterns. Edit. Please help me find the name, it's been bugging me. I think the victim also made YouTube videos on how to escape a kidnapping.
The greatest serial killer from Brazil, Pedrinho Matador, allegedly murdered more than 100 people, 47 of them while in jail. One of them was, for example, his own father, that was also arrested for killing his mother. He also ate his father's heart at the occasion. Once, he was in the cell with another murderer, famous for raping his cellmate. Pedrinho, afraid of being raped, killed the guy at the first day.
Viola Liuzzo. She was a Michigan housewife who believed strongly in the civil rights movement. She left her family to march on Selma, and shuttle African Americans to protests and the polls. She was murdered by a carload of KKK members for betraying the race, one of which turned out to be an FBI informant. In order to shield the informant from guilt, the FBI spent the next 20 years putting out misinformation about her case and her death, going as far as to call her a prostitute, drug addict, and even a communist in the middle of the Red Scare. In reality, she was a devout Catholic and mother of 5 who had the audacity to think that equality was something worth fighting for.
The murder of Jamie Bulger. A 2-year-old boy from Kirby, Merseyside, England, who was abducted, tortured and killed by 2 10-year-old boys, Robert Thompson and John Venables, on Friday, February 12, 1993. They both got off lightly as well, and Venables was repeatedly arrested later in life for CP charges. It is an offense in the UK to own or share a picture of these two or reveal any information about them.
Toy box killer. It's brutal.
Oh, you know, the guy who consensually fried and ate a guy's penis with, let him bleed out and ate more of him.
Just got done reading Bodies in Barrels, the Snowtown Murders. Long story short, John Bunting, and with the help of a few friends, tortured, killed, and dismembered 11 people, putting their bodies in large plastic barrels and keeping them for years. By the end he had run out of room for them, so he rented an old bank and stored the barrels in the vault. John Bunting had no sense of smell, so he got caught when the stench eventually got so bad it permeated through vault and neighbors complained. Apparently he enjoyed stirring up the decomposing human soup. I left out a lot of details, but you should totally read the book, it's pretty good and pretty beep up.
My mum tells a story about her aunt and uncle having their home invaded. So it was a group of guys who'd escaped prison and were high and trying to hide out. They also wanted money to get more drugs supposedly. They broke into their house and duct taped them to chairs, then pumped them full of drugs. My great uncle escaped but couldn't get his wife out of their burning home, so she probably wasn't dead when the fire started and probably just couldn't escape like my great uncle did. He was horribly disfigured from the fire and obviously mentally scarred by not being able to rescue his wife from the fire. I cannot find articles about the incident as it happened in a small town back in 1994, but if anyone knows about a prison break in '94 in rural New Mexico, then it's potentially connected. The guy who did it and got out of prison was in a video about a rehabilitation job where ex-cons sell donuts. My mum saw him and started freaking out rightfully, which is why I heard the story the first time. I think as it's a pretty beep-up true crime story that hits close to home. I also can't remember the video where the one dude got out of prison, but if I shared that video his name would be attached to the story and I don't feel comfortable doing that anyway. Edit. I asked if she could recount the story and it turns out I forgot some details that I fixed in the second paragraph.
If by true crime you mean like a crime that happened. A few years ago I worked at a call center and one guy on my team who was probably 40-ish started talking to me and the other guys who were all early 20s about Call of Duty. Well, turns out he and I are both into guns too. I'm like, hell yeah, I just made a friend. So he invites me to his house to shoot one day, like we kicked it, man, just had a friendly day. So a few weeks of working together, he asks where I live, and when I tell him, he tells me his parents used to live down the street. I asked if they moved, and he dead-ass tells me this story. His perspective: my parents lived about a mile or two down from you. They didn't move. What happened was my sister and her boyfriend wanted money, so they killed my mother in her sleep and waited for my father to come home and shot and killed him. They tried to bury one and burn the other but were unsuccessful and got caught. My sister is actually up for parole next year, but her BF is doing life. They had an episode of some A&E crime show on it a few years ago when it happened. Holy beep, yo. I was weirded the beep out at that.
Pretty recent. I found this extremely disturbing.
There was a case that was the opposite of Ken McElroy, the bully who got murdered in front of dozens of witnesses and no one saw anything. The case involved several bullies who targeted two brothers constantly and ended with them kidnapping them and beating them in front of witnesses. That escalated to them being tied up, tossed in the back of a pickup truck and paraded around town before they were eventually shot. None of the witnesses called the police, even though the final incident went on for several days.
Junko Furuta. I'm not going to describe it. Just look it up yourself.
Peter Scully. He is an Australian who fled to the Philippines and operated a secret dark web child pornography website known as No Limits Fun, NLF, where he and others raped and murdered children and babies. They produced videos such as Daisy's Destruction, which is so extreme that it was for some time regarded as an urban legend. It features the torture and brutal rape of a number of girls by Scully and some Filipina accomplices. The three main victims were Liza, aged 12, Cindy, 11, and Daisy, 18 months. Margaret Aculo, then project coordinator for the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime and an expert on child abuse investigations, described the case as horrific and the worst she had ever heard of. His crimes were deemed so severe that some prosecutors supported the reintroduction of the death penalty as punishment for Scully, despite the fact capital punishment has been abolished in the Philippines since 2006. It still gives me the chills just thinking about it.
The Shannon Watts case. It was horrible. Kept me awake for several nights trying to understand how someone could do something so wicked to his own family. I still don't understand. We will probably never know.
My neighbor was a famous restaurant owner. It was a huge story. She conspired with her boyfriend to kill her husband. She bought him a motorcycle and he used it to commit the drive-by shooting. They both went to jail, but she ended up getting out after some time because of an appeal or something. It's always weird knowing right next door is a wealthy woman who killed her own husband.
Murder of James Bulger makes me sick.
Sylvia Likens.
The Chris Watts murders. There are more, like Andrea Yates, Scott Peterson, Casey Anthony, Sylvia Likens, Jamie Bulger, and the list goes on.
He was one of my best friends in high school.
Carla Homolka, part of the Ken and Barbie killers. Her husband was sick, but I am deeply disturbed that she would participate in the drugging, rape, and murder of her own younger sister. Disgusting. And she had a very light sentence.
Who's that serial killer that turned people's skin into furniture? That one.
Jeffrey Dahmer has to be on the list.
May your day be filled with joy and happiness. And please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more quality content every day.